Well, hey, everybody. I am Dave, and I'm here with my good friend...
Chris?
That's right. I forgot his name, so I had to have him toss it in there just in case. We are here, and we want to introduce you guys to what we're doing, a little podcast, this idea that we had. I always wanted a radio show. They don't give those out to everybody. In fact, they may not give them out to anybody anymore. I don't even know if radio is still a thing.
It's all AI now, I think. It's just chatbot is just doing their lineup.
Yeah, that Rush Limbaugh was the last human, and then when he passed away, no, it's just, it's Chat GPT is now on filling up the AM and the FM all the time. So... Well, we have decided we're going to bring a little, try our hand at podcasting. I've tried many things and failed at all of them, and decided that let's see if we can work these mics, rock these mics, and riff on here for you guys for a little bit.
Yeah, and my motivation, honestly, is I've just always wanted to have a situation where I can say, caller, go ahead. So
we have callers.
Oh, do we not? Can we do that?
I'll have my wife call us real quick.
Okay, fantastic.
She'll do voices. It'll be great.
We need to work on that. Figure out how to get people to call into a podcast.
Well, I'm sure that there is a way, time travel and just actors. We can call each other. And
that's a good idea. All right, for the future.
So what we're calling this for now, I'd say this is like a pilot, right? And maybe we get picked up by the network. Maybe you fire me. It's possible. I am replaced with a more handsome, slimmer Dave.
Which is important for podcasting.
It is. It's very important. But we are just two middle-aged guys just trying to work it out.
Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out.
What we're going to bring to you all is we're at the point in our lives where we're doing as much looking back as looking forward. And, some of the looking back informs what we're doing. Some of it's just simple in the future. Some of it's just simply nostalgia. So we thought it'd be neat to have a conversation with each other and with you all, talking about the things that we love, the things that we loved, and how they frame our lives today and how they'll affect it in the future. Kind of looking through the lens of nostalgia and where we are as people. We're both Christians. There's no reason to hide that. We're bringing our spiritual point of view into place with this as well. And just, try to have a conversation with everybody. Maybe get you all to think about some of these topics. Maybe these are things you have discussed with your friends, right? And maybe just have a little fun with it too.
Yeah, and I think that the argument could be made that, gosh, there's a gajillion podcasts out there, and we'll probably duplicate topics that some other people have talked about on podcasts. But I do think there's value in how we reacted, how we discovered a thing, or how something impacted our lives, and the way we look at that through our own individual lens. I think there's some value there, and I think the people who are listening, might form a connection. I know that some of my favorite podcasts, I've never met these people in my life, but I'm like, oh hey, me and that guy, we are simpatico on opinions. So I think that kind of gives us a little bit of justification, if we needed any, to sit down and start talking about things.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. One of my favorite podcasts is a smaller podcast, but I made a connection with one of the hosts. He's a great guy. We have a lot in common. Sure, we have as much not in common, though, and we have little chats on Facebook every now and then, and I'm a listener, and I think it's cool. I made a friend, through this medium, right? And maybe that there's an opportunity for that as well, so...
Yeah, absolutely. So with that kind of preamble, should we jump to what's in the news?
Absolutely. Let's talk about what's going on.
All right. So a couple of things that I found that I wanted to bring to the discussion of what's in the news. The U2 Las Vegas residency.
Yes.
I guess it's MGM has created a spherical object that can hold people, and there'll probably be some kind of weird projection that happens in this thing. But they picked U2 to open it, which
makes sense.
Absolutely does.
Surprised they said yes.
Well, I think they're at a point in their career where a Las Vegas residency makes some kind of sense. I don't think it has the stigma that maybe it used to have. Yep. back in the day when it was like Wayne Newton in Las Vegas
Right.
kind of a thing.
Yeah, Celine Dion, Elton John, those they broke down.
Exactly.
Britney Spears, even no joke. They broke down some of those stigmas and made it more. They showed that accessibility in that form was important, right? Not touring around, the fans are coming to you, a little bit different, but I think they made it so that big stars can do that, sort of shame free. You're not in the downhill slide of your career. It's just a different and equally as viable as going and selling out stadiums all over the country part of your career. But I was a little surprised. It didn't feel like, and I think Bono is someone who's full of contradictions. But there's something about it that at first I was like, that it seems like they would be more interested in going to the fans,
right?
But also, I mean, they're getting up in years, and
true. It's a new thing. I mean, one thing that U2's always been about is breaking barriers and what's new, and sometimes that's gotten them into trouble. But I think that seeing this as like the new MGM Sphere, the first time they've done a Vegas residency, it's all new to them, and I think that excites them. But
yep,
they're doing it without Larry on the drums. And as a fan, that is a hard thing for me to swallow.
It is interesting. And I remember when I first saw the article where this was one where Larry Mullen Jr., not Larry Mullen Sr.,
no,
who's not as nearly as good of a drummer. I would assume he's probably passed on.
I think so.
But he was talking about this, and he was coming from him, it was kind of strange, right? He did get the point across that he had some maintenance to do, health reasons. It sounds like maybe some shoulder work. I would imagine drumming for many years is probably like being a pitcher in Major League Baseball. There's a really good chance you're going to get the surgery. He'll get a surgery named after him, the Larry Mullen Jr. procedure, where they, I don't know, do something with a tendon.
My Larry Mullen's out, so I gotta get that fixed.
Yeah, I'm always struggling with. I keep a wrap on, a Larry Mullen branded wrap, and but I think so I read the article, and he had some interest. I don't know, you may have read a similar interview with him, but he had said some really strange stuff, like you two are different people. Got it? They are four separate, distinct individuals, and they worship a different God, or he kind of it was kind of an odd way. I think he was trying to frame that, where they go, I don't necessarily have to go. But I thought that if they all ran away, he would follow. Sorry about that. But
yeah,
it was a really interesting way. But it really came down to, I got to have some work done. I need a year off. I've been putting this off a long time. Yeah. So I think that's why he's out. So is this an asterisk? If you go see U2 without a member of the band, and I don't know if it matters which one, but without any of them, is that an asterisk? Do you get to say, I saw U2? Is the residency a little bit of an asterisk, even?
So to me, it feels like it. And there was an article where Edge was interviewed about it, and and this is what I suspected all along, but he said, look, these deals do not happen overnight. When we started talking about doing the residency, it was all four of us, we were in, and then Larry developed these issues that he has to take care of, and he's got to do it for him. So that at that point, we're in a contract, and we're looking at ourselves and we're saying, do we break the contract? Do we figure out a way to go on without Larry? And that's what I suspected was happening. But as a lifelong fan of U2, as the kind of fan who is unfair in the sense that they could be like, hey, our next album is just covers of 50 show tunes, and I'd be like, that's awesome, I can't wait. As a fan, it pains me to not have Larry there. And honestly, in a situation where no question I'd have tickets and I'd be going, now I'm like, do I want to? And especially since this is supposed to be a celebration of Achtung Baby, which is hands down my favorite U2 album, and then to do it without Larry. And I'm sure the guy, no offense to the guy that they've picked to play the drums, I'm sure he's phenomenal.
You wouldn't get like, well, he's
exactly,
okay.
Yeah. He's at the high school in Las Vegas.
He drums at church sometimes.
He's fine.
Yeah, he's all right.
And I understand Larry was part of the picking process of this gentleman. Still, it hurts. And before now, there was only one concert, not even an entire show, just one concert where it wasn't all four of them. There was one in Australia where Adam got sick and he couldn't do it. And now to have an entire residency without Larry, I feel for him. And I do believe that unlike some bands who can manage to be flexible in who is there, I don't think U2 is one of them.
It's not. No, U2 is a situation where, the whole is far greater and far different than the sum of its parts. And I do not think that any one of those, if they fell out like on a permanent basis, the band shouldn't go on. I don't think would go on too. I actually, I think that it's kind of like the Beatles in that sense, right? I mean, even without Ringo, the Beatles would not have been the Beatles.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's U2. I think something like this temporary, that it's a medical reason. I would say that it makes sense for them to go on. I feels like maybe it's a little bit of an asterisk, but I'm not, okay. But I wouldn't be too worried about it. Have you seen them live before? I should ask.
I have. I've seen them 3 times.
Okay. I have not. And the only band that I've ever seen live, and I've seen twice live, is a band that has a very, like a rotating cast of characters. That is the Smashing Pumpkins, right? Yep. Billy Corgan, as long as he's up front, it's the Smashing Pumpkins.
Sure.
It does not matter who else is there. That's the opposite, right, of what we're dealing with U2. I would still love to go. I'd still like to see it. I would I would love to see it. But I would be aware of the absence of one of the members, and I think that awareness, if you heard it, you wouldn't pick up on it. I'm not going to pretend to know music that well, but it would be more like, I want to see all 4 of them because they're, it's an important crew. That's one of those bands that, like I said, I just don't think that they could go on. I'm in agreement that it is a little bit different, but the circumstances make it okay. Now, if this was, I gotta ask you this: if this was the Edge or Bono, I think this conversation would be harder, different. Right? Yeah. Because as important as Larry and Adam are, and as equal as they are, it's certainly Bono. Listen, there's just no U2. Yeah. There's no songs without Bono, but I feel the same way about the Edge in so many ways, right?
Yeah, that's fair, and which is not to say that if we reformed U2 with Bono and Edge and 2 other guys, would I want to see it? Absolutely not. I would not want to see it, because I do value Adam and Larry, but I think that's a good point. That if it was Edge that was needing the medical attention, would they have even discussed the contract aspect, or would they have just
Edge is getting like a permanent beanie installed? He's like, I'm tired of switching out my beanies, and he's going to get one just permanently affixed.
But you are right. The drumming takes more of a impact on the body than you playing a guitar does, or playing a bass does, or certainly singing does. So I think we'll close out this conversation by saying we wish Larry well. Hope for a speedy recovery, and whatever he's got going on, he'll be able to return, and then maybe they'll do a residency somewhere else down the line, or who knows?
Yeah, I think that I'd still go see them. It's one of those things where I'm like trying to figure out how I could align a work trip and do that.
Well, I will say Vegas is fairly easy and fairly cheap to get to from just about anywhere in the United States. Yeah. So, if you're going to do a residency, that's probably the place to do it. So moving on to news item number 2, Creed 3, big box office opening. What do you think of the Creed movies, and what do you think of the Rocky legacy?
Well, this is not the first time I've had this conversation. That's so I think an awful lot of. So I like Stallone. I think that this is the franchise that is the most important of all the body of work that he has, and I think he's done some really great things in his career. I think he's done some awful things. I think he'd be the first to probably tell you that. I liked the Creed movies because he was in them. And I have zero interest in seeing a Creed film that does not have Rocky Stallone in it. And in my family, I'm in the minority because they're like, oh, it looks pretty good. But I'm like, well, no Stallone, no interest for me.
I do not have that opinion. And I now not counting all the business stuff that's happened, because that's a hot mess. And
it is.
And somebody was done wrong, and I'm not smart enough to know which party it was. But
it was Stallone.
Okay.
100% confident he has the bigger muscles.
Okay. Well, if we
trust him,
if that's our judgment, that's fine. But I will say, just from a story perspective, I think they did an excellent job passing the torch. And I think they did a brilliant job in continuing to carry this forward. The idea, even back to Creed 1, where it's Adonis Creed, I just thought that was incredibly smart. Because if it would have been Rocky's son, it would have been like, this doesn't work. You know, if they would have done anything else, I don't think it would have worked. But because it was Creed, and then you had the first two movies with Rocky, and then so brilliantly you had the second one, which was Rocky 4 Part 2.
Yes.
You know, and I think they've earned it. I have not seen Creed 3 yet. I will. And I think they've earned it, and I say good for them and good for Michael B. Jordan.
It's fair. No, Michael B. Jordan did an excellent job. Plays the son of Apollo quite well, and it just doesn't hold the same interest for me. And I think it comes down to I may be more of a fan of Stallone than I am of any of the individual roles that he's played. I think he's just a cool, interesting guy. Love the story behind the first Rocky. Right, the legacy of the first Rocky is that less about the sports movies, and I think it did inject life into sports movies, but more about this poor guy sits down, writes a screenplay in the matter of 72 hours. I think that, and it could be apocryphal. I have no idea if that's real, but there's no doubt that he did not have a lot of experience. He did this. He did it fast.
Yeah.
And then he got the opportunity to star in the movie, which he negotiated hard because they originally did not want him. There was other people that were lined up. I think I remember maybe hearing Travolta was mentioned. There was other people, right? But it's a great story. And that to me is the legacy, is that it launched Stallone's career more so than it is anything about the movies themselves, which are movies that I love, with the exception of Rocky 5.
Yeah, that's fair.
Terrible movie. Tommy Gunn.
Yeah.
But I think that those movies are brilliant, and I think that the first two Creeds are really good. But and it may be one of those things that I go and I watch it and I get kind of drug along into it, and then I love it, and I say, hey, I was wrong, because Michael B. Jordan is a good actor. The characters that they've created are good characters. I don't know. It's hard for me to get excited about a film that I consider still part of the Rocky franchise without Rocky. But it's interesting. He was going to be played by Larry Mullen Jr. When Stallone wouldn't. And I was like, well, now I know why he couldn't be there with the band, because he was bulking up.
Yeah, but man, I guess that didn't work out for him. So, all right. Final piece of news, and I'll be interested to get your take on this one because I have a hot take myself. The first image of Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn for Joker 2 was released.
So I think that she is a better choice for Lady Gaga than Margot Robbie. I think that the visual style that's brought in the Joker films is going to be one that I think is going to complement the character well, particularly some of the character traits that are not emphasized in James Gunn's films or the cartoons, which she's insane, she's gross, she's madly in love with Mr. Joker or whatever she calls him in the cartoon. I can't remember. I think that that's going to be really neat. I'm still not sure that film needed a sequel because it was brilliant and it felt self-contained and no reason to take that forward. I really never thought Joaquin Phoenix would do it, frankly.
True.
However, that being said, I look at it and if it has to exist and it's going to exist with Harley Quinn, she's a really good choice.
All right. So my take is this. I have absolutely no problem with Lady Gaga. I have no problem with her acting. I have no problem with her music. For being a fat 42-year-old, I have a surprising number of Lady Gaga tracks on my playlist. I'll say that now. But the problem I have is Joker 2.
Okay.
I don't care. And I'll go even a step further in saying Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, I don't care. I was not impressed.
Wow. Okay.
Now, I'll clarify that. Joaquin Phoenix, fabulous. Did a great job. But I did not need the Joker origin story. I thought, and I've seen it twice, I feel the Joker is a much more effective character when we don't know his past. And I think giving him a hardcore past and one that's set in stone for this particular cinematic universe, I think that's a mistake. And I'll go back to Nolan's The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger as Joker. And you have that scene where he says, "Do you want to know how I got these scars?" And you're sitting in the theater for the first time, and I still remember this.
Oh.
And he tells the story, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, I guess that's what they wanted to go with for this particular film, and fine. And then 20 minutes later, "Do you want to know how I got these stars?" And he tells a completely different story. That is Joker to me.
I can't disagree. I'll go back even further and go back to the Killing Joke, where he says he preferred his past to be multiple choice.
Yes.
So I tend to agree. So how I framed it, because I was so impressed by the Joker, the movie, or Joker, because Joaquin Phoenix is brilliant. I love the Gotham that they portray. It is a different view of the Waynes than we've ever gotten before. I actually, first of all, it is, Elseworlds, quote unquote, something comic book folks will be very familiar with.
Yep.
Folks that aren't comic book just need to know it's not canon. It doesn't count. It's just a different take, wildly different in some cases. I actually view it obviously as being Elseworlds. I don't even view that as Joker. I view that as maybe like a prototypical, someone who inspired in the future the real Joker. So it doesn't count, and that movie could have worked if it was called Crazy Guy in Clown Makeup.
Now that's a good point. Yeah,
because it was just a good movie.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I guess if it had been sold to me that way, I would have felt differently about it. But just thinking about it in terms of, and good grief, with as much as they reboot everything, is anything canon at this point? But but it was kind of, I don't know, I felt it was sold to me as this is Joker moving forward. And I didn't respond to that. I feel like I gave it a fair shake. It's not going to be a movie that I constantly return to. But I thought Joaquin Phoenix's performance was remarkable, especially coming from the situation with Heath Ledger. And to me, man, when Heath Ledger passed away and we saw that performance, in my opinion, is nobody should have touched Joker for 30 years.
Yeah, especially if your name is Jared Leto.
Well, that's a different topic. Yes. But the fact that he did, and the fact that he did it well, did it with his very own take, and he's just a very talented actor. There's no question about that.
That scene with him in the children's hospital where he's doing the little dance and the gun falls out, and then the scene later where he's trying to cover for himself, that's part of my act.
Yeah.
That's not part of really. And if you think about the movie, and here's how I prefer things. I saw it twice in the theaters, actually. That was back in the day where pre-pandemic, where you go to theaters. We had one of those AMC pass things. I was on a work trip the second time. I didn't have anything else to do. It's going to go to the Overland Park AMC or wherever it was, and I watched it. So I think about that movie as more like just a bunch of really awesome scenes that they connect together, and they tell a story that's fine. But if you just look at them, like the scene in the subway, the scene in the hospital with his mom, the earlier scenes with his mom, everything where he's with the talk show host De Niro, if you just look at it like a bunch of individual scenes, they're all sort of master classes on acting. Everyone does a fantastic job that's in the film, particularly Joaquin Phoenix, who's just, every movie that I watch him in, it's like he's at the top of his game, right? He just keeps getting better because he's just a fantastic actor. But I think it works if you look at it like that. To me, did I need the Joker 2? No, I really didn't. I will watch it, and it's probably one that I'll watch at home and not in the theater, just because I'm not super excited about it. But if you're going to get it and it's going to have Harley Quinn, I'm not sure you can find a better actress than Lady Gaga to do it. And I don't even think she's all that great in any other context, but I just think it really just visually, physically, and as if it's going to be a musical, which does not make a lick of sense to me. However, if you're going to do it that way, sure, I'll give it a shot.
All right. Very good.
So our main topic today is just an idea. It kind of goes along with something we were talking about earlier, which is you got your past, the present, and the future, and how you look at those things, and what informs, the past. To what degree does it inform your present, and to what degree do you expect it will inform the future? Or are you using the past as a lens, which I regularly do. I just am a nostalgic person, but I also just, try to tap into the things that I've learned, good lessons, hard lessons, and the question that we brought today, the topic today is, let's look back in our past and find 3 things that you kept, that you brought forward with you from, early adulthood, childhood, that you carried with you in some ways, and 3 things that you may have discarded. And you say things, it can be behaviors, things that you like, attitudes, opinions, whatever, right? So we just kind of carrying forward that whole concept, which I think the podcast is based around, which is looking back on stuff. What continued to make an impact in your life, and what are the things you said, I don't want to make an impact in my life? So let's just alternate. Right? Starts with the keeps, and then we'll do the discards. Chris, you want to get us started?
All right, so we're starting with the keeps, things I brought with me. The first one on my list is video games. I brought video games with me, and I loved them as a kid. I grew up in the perfect window for the original Nintendo Entertainment System, and it's a hobby that I've never let go of. And the reason I put it on my list, and the reason I put it first on my list, is I've brought it into my adulthood in a much broader way than just a hobby. I have a company on the side, and we design video games, and we release them, and hopefully someday that'll take off. That'll be my primary source of income. So not only do I think that they are, I won't say the pinnacle of media, but I'll say it's pretty close. It incorporates visuals, it incorporates user interactions, it incorporates storytelling. So it's kind of the combination of every other medium into a new form and new substance. Not only does it do that, but also it's impacted my career. I will look at a 20-hour video game that I put my time into as being every bit as beneficial to me as a human being as reading a great novel. I think that still has merit. I think I learn from them, the good ones anyway. I think that they've really been important to me growing up and continue to be important to me now. So video games.
Well, gosh darn it. I'm going to swear to all those who are listening, we are not the same person. My first item was also video games. We worked on these in isolation, and while they're not a vocation or something that I wish would become my primary source. I don't think I could ever design them. They don't have that sort of creativity. It's awesome that you do. I would love it, but they would not be good fun games. They would just be like, oh, I played Super Mario Brothers, but now Mario's blue. Oh yeah, I switched the blue and the red. I can't you tell?
Super Blue Brothers.
It's a whole new experience. I loved them as a kid. My first video game system was an Atari 2600. Much less emphasis on story back in those days.
Definitely.
And then I got, a few years later, I got the NES. We were poor, so I kind of got it behind everybody else, but I got that. And then you and I played an absolute ton of NES and Sega Genesis. I've always kept that. On the bookshelf behind you, I have a series of retro game encyclopedias, or retro game, but, NES, Super NES, Sega Master System, and the Atari 2600, 800 series of visual encyclopedias is what they're called. They continue to be a big part of my life. I rarely play them. I say rarely. I still play them. I love the Nintendo Switch. I also have an Xbox. I think Game Pass is really cool. It's a really smart way to get new games in front of people, and it's really great for the consumer because it just allows me to play a flat fee, and then I get to try all kinds of stuff.
Absolutely.
But I'm terrible at them, especially the modern games. And I'm much better at the Switch games. Switch Sports, which is a revamp of Wii Sports, is a blast. Of course, the new Mario Kart, which is the same as the last couple Mario Karts, but just with better refined graphics and some maybe some new characters and some new maps, is I think maybe the greatest video game ever made. I have a ton of stuff on my Switch. Big Nintendo guy, but the video games have always stayed with me, and I can't say that they've shaped a whole lot in terms of my personality, but it's something that I still really enjoy. I listen to video game podcasts, I watch video game YouTubers. It's not an obsession, but it's something I do to fill some free spots of time when I don't want to do anything particularly serious. That's something that I do to relax. The game that I'm playing right now, and I tell everybody about it, and they laugh when they hear it, but this is a real game. Power Wash Simulator.
Yes.
Is a great fun way to relax. and I'm dealing with some health issues right now that make my right hand not work particularly well. So I don't play a lot of real twitchy games. That's fine. You can take as long as you need as you're simulating a power wash business. A coworker of mine reminded me that I could come over to his house and he would make the experience very real. I could power wash his siding, which I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll stick with the video game version. But yeah, no, video games top of my list.
All right. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
All right. You want my second thing I brought with me?
Yeah. Let's see.
All right. I cannot imagine this is going to be on your list.
Okay.
Because this is kind of unique and personal. But Stephen King, I brought with me. And
he's here.
No, Stephen, come out of the office.
Oh, right. He wrote 2 books waiting outside.
Yes, he did. And we didn't want to interrupt him for the third book, so that's why we're not going to bring him on the podcast today. But no, Stephen King I brought with me, and I was as I was thinking about this list, this is just such a unique aspect of my life. I didn't read King as a kid. I mean, and you would hope most kids wouldn't read King. But my father was a huge Stephen King fan. I'm sure you remember coming over to my house and
the books, the side of the chair. Yep.
Yeah, books everywhere. And we grew up in a very modest home. It was like 800 square feet, and it was more books than anything. And my dear mother hated it, but she put up with it because that was my dad's thing. He read books constantly. And that really informed a lot of my life. I read books constantly now. They've always been a huge source of education, entertainment, et cetera, et cetera. But my dad was a huge Stephen King fan. And so I grew up with these covers. And I grew up looking at these spines on my dad's bookshelf. And they were just such a part of my subconscious that when I got old enough to start reading them, I just immediately gravitated towards Stephen King. And I will say over the years, he has become my favorite writer. I'm a huge fan of all of his work. And what's unique is I'll read King and I'll be like, why did my dad like this? Like, this is so the antithesis of who my father is. And preparing for this, I realized I need to ask him that question because I never have. And we've never had a conversation about it. But I don't understand why he would gravitate towards it. It's the only horror genre thing at all that he's ever paid any attention to. We never went to horror movies, as a family growing up, nothing, but he had this obsession with Stephen King books. And now I have this obsession with Stephen King books. And the fact that he's still going, the fact that he basically writes 2 books a year. And I still get that excitement this late in life of, oh, hey, in September, there's a new King book going out. Can't wait to go to Barnes & Noble, get a copy, and start reading it immediately. So that's something I brought with me, is Stephen King.
That's a great question about why would your dad like that? Because I wondered that myself. It did not fit in with the rest of his personality and the other things that he seemed to like. I know he also read history and, of course, books on religion and
so I'm going to pause you there for a minute so that the listeners understand. I mean, tremendous books on religion. The man had bookshelves and boxes full of religious books, and he would read not only of his own faith, but he would read books from other faiths, and that was just his point of study. He's always been that way his whole life. And then so to see, a copy of Josephus next to a copy of It, that's how I grew up, and it didn't make a lot of sense. And so I will have to ask him about that.
That's very, the answer. I don't know. Maybe he's just preparing for his meeting with King where he works to convert him. He's like, I'm just studying up.
That could be.
I've read 1 Stephen King book, and I have attempted to read others, and I couldn't get through them for various reasons, but I read Cell.
Okay.
Which was not very good.
No, it isn't. And that was a poor one to pick to read.
I've attempted to read The Stand, and what got me on The Stand was the long descriptions. It wasn't even long, right? I don't say that, but the descriptions of the virus spreading and how it spread. This is way pre-COVID days. It still creeped me out to the point where I was uncomfortable with it, and I couldn't. And then the Regulators I attempted to read, and it was just a little too much for me.
So it's funny you mentioned that. I'm rereading The Stand right now. And I'm about halfway through it, and it's the first time I've approached it post-COVID, and it's made it 1,000 times creepier. Because, like some of the ways he's describing the spread of the virus in The Stand, I'm reading it, I'm like, I saw that. And thankfully COVID was not nearly as deadly as Captain Trips, but it's still I mean, he tapped into a nerve with the stand, no doubt about it.
Yeah, he did. The descriptions of they stop at this gas station, they interacted with these two people, and then he would go on to follow those people, and that's the sort of what we now call contact tracing, right?
Yep.
He was doing that in a fictionalized form, which made you realize
in the late 70s.
Wow. Thankfully it wasn't COVID. Wasn't you gave the name of the virus the name? What's it called?
Captain Trips.
Is that what it's called?
So in the book, there's the West Coast of California. They call the virus Captain Trips. The East Coast call it the super flu. But,
okay.
But Captain Trips is a much more fun name for a
virus. I remember the super flu because I watched the original miniseries that had Gary Sinise and
Molly Ringwald.
Yeah, Molly Ringwald and some other people were in it, and then the guy with lots of teeth that was the devil. Randall Flagg.
The character. I don't remember the actor's name.
Yeah, he had lots of teeth.
He did.
Way too many teeth. He probably should have got that. Of course, if he had got that fixed when he was a kid, then he wouldn't have been able to play Randall Flagg.
Exactly.
That's okay. Well, that is not on my list because I'm not a King fan, but that is really interesting. I want to hear your dad's.
I'll report back on that.
I definitely want to hear about that. What I kept continue to keep, and I think I feel like I can actually say this. I think people are going to say this now that maybe don't mean it, but I feel like I can truly say it. Comic books and comic book stuff, right? Comic things in the orbit of comic books. You and I were reading comic books when it wasn't cool.
Yeah.
And now everyone's like, oh, everyone's wearing a Captain America t-shirt or whatever. When we were kids, you wore a Captain America t-shirt, you would get beat up.
Yes, you would.
And you deserved it. Let's just be honest. You were asking for it by wearing that ridiculous t-shirt. And our Captain America wasn't, Chris Evans. It was Reb Brown. I mean, it was not a particularly... He wasn't a megastar, right? He was a C-lister, right? So, but I kept the comic book stuff with me. I still have, I was more of a DC guy, certainly. I still have a near encyclopedic knowledge of DC in the 80s and early 90s. I can still remember that stuff. I'm one of those people who went to Black Adam and enjoyed it, and not everybody did. But I was like making the list of all the stuff that they didn't quite get right about Dr. Fate. But that it didn't bother me too much because at least they got more wrong or right than they did wrong, to be sure. But I've always kept that stuff with me, and kept it as we were watching the comic book movies in the MCU, and now it's everybody's thing. And so everybody likes comic book stuff now. When they say that, what they mean is I like the Marvel movies. That's what they mean, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not gatekeeping by saying, oh, you can only I'm not the comic book guy from The Simpsons. Like, well, actually, and then going on, but. We liked it when it was not something that everyone liked, and the trip to the comic book store wasn't filled with the cool kids. It was filled with kids like us and adults like us, and
yes.
I've kept that. I don't read much in the way of comic books now. I flip through them. I will go back and revisit old stuff that I read back in the day when I enjoyed it. I think comic books have gone in different directions and stuff where I probably wouldn't enjoy them nearly as much. And the characters that I loved have changed so dramatically or just no longer in the picture that I wouldn't love it like I did, but I've kept that with me, and I do get to annoy everyone by talking about how, particularly in the DC side, a little bit on the Marvel side, but how they get things wrong. Like, well, Superman could actually do this, and if he showed up, then he would. Well, and then why is Aquaman having trouble with this? Because Superman was to fly, and then everyone's like, stop! Superman can't be in every movie, and I believe he should be. But yeah, I've kept that with me. It's not a huge, it's not like a defining characteristic like some of these will be, but it's still an important thing and something that I've kept.
Yeah, that's, it's a good thing. And I miss those days of those trips to the comic book store. I mean, some of my fondest memories were you and I going out on a Saturday, and you had the greatest skill of being able to barter with these comic book guys.
I wish I don't look at it like the same way. I just felt like I was mostly just annoying them until they gave me what I wanted.
Hey, to 13-year-old you and me, it worked. And I distinctly remember having like my stack of the comics I was going to trade that day and handing them to you and saying, okay, this is what I want.
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah.
Because I could not do it. Like I'd be like, can I give you these for this one comic book? And the guy would be like, you can give me these and $50. I'd be like, okay.
That comic was only $25 on it. Okay, fine. Here's your.
Because I'm terrible at that. But my gosh, I loved those stores. There was one in our area called the Comic Empire.
Comic Empire. Oh, the greatest comic book store.
They had everything.
They did.
They had everything, and it blew my little kid's mind, and I loved it. It was great.
Since then, I have been to a larger comic book store, much larger than that one was in Pittsburgh. There was a mall called, I think it was called the Century 3 Mall. They just recently knocked it down, but they had a comic book store that took up most of the third floor of this mall. It was unbelievably huge. Many years ago I went to that, but it did bring back Comic Empire vibes, and I love the Comic Empire. And the stores we had since, they got progressively worse.
Yeah.
Comic Page wasn't that great, the local place. But now all that stuff is really, it's an online experience.
Right.
And now, take the collection out of it, you can get these comic books all digitally, which I reread some stuff recently that was just read digitally from the DC service when it was, I don't even remember what it was called. This was a few years back, but you don't get the same feel, you don't get the same page. But if you're just wanting to remind yourself what was that storyline and how was that handled, those options are now open,
indeed,
digitally, which is cool.
It is. All right, my last thing that I brought with me was, and again, this was got kind of a unique story behind it, but I brought guitar with me, which is unique because as a kid, I had one and it sat in the corner and I did absolutely nothing with it. But just by virtue of it being there later in life, I was like, this is a skill I would enjoy having. And so I'm not going to say I'm a virtuoso or anything. In fact, I would say I play guitar average. But I enjoy it, and it's a great hobby. When I have the time to sit down and play guitar, I will. I probably now own 5 different guitars, and if I had the money to own more, I would. But my dad played guitar, and I remember growing up, and my mother played piano, and they sang as a duet for a while when I was really, really young. I have very few memories of that, but they were musical, and they were both people that just never did anything with it. I mean, they worked average jobs most of their life, and the poor people would come home, they'd be exhausted,
Sure.
and they couldn't do anything with it. But my dad, he did play guitar from time to time, and so I had that exposure, but I didn't do anything with it, and probably till I was in my 30s. And then I decided this is something I want to spend some time with. So in a roundabout way, that came back to me from my youth.
And I did not realize that. I knew your parents were musical. I remember your dad, and I also remember a guitar in your bedroom. I do remember that. Do you read music, or is this more of like with tabs? Is that what they call it? I don't know anything about music at all.
So I can read music, but I'm very slow at it. I cannot take a piece of sheet music and immediately start playing it, but I can take a piece of sheet music and learn it and then figure it out, and then I've got the song. Tab, to me, is a perfectly valid way to play guitar, especially guitar. And it's just kind of an easier language to pick up and read and go. And so I'll use a combination of those things. And I've been recently trying to expand. I've got a keyboard. It's not a full piano. My wife has a full piano, but I'm intimidated to play it because it's too loud. With my little keyboard, I can put my headphones on and make all the mistakes I want to. But with that, being able to read sheet music is a lot more important. And so I've been working on those skills, but I haven't developed them to a point where it would be useful yet.
Do you do much like composing, like writing your own pieces?
So with the video game thing that we talked about earlier, with all the games we've made, I've done most of the music for the games. And that kind of became a situation of where, one, can I do this? I wanted to try it and see if it was something I could do. And then also, well, it's going to be cheaper if I do it versus hiring somebody to come in and compose for this game. So in that sense, I have done some composing. I don't think of myself that way. And it's not really something, like, I don't ever anticipate recording an album. This is going a little bit off topic as far as our list, but I think fits in perfectly with the topic of the podcast. That's one thing I regret about my teenage years. Like, I would have loved to have been in a band. Like, I think that would have been amazing. And I think that you and I, with all the different interests that we bounced around as kids, I feel like we just barely missed that one. Like if you had just come in one more day and been like, let me see your guitar, I feel like you would have been like, let's start a band. And then we would have brought in I
would have brought in the keytar.
Oh, even better.
Yeah.
Even better. Can't go without a keytar. But, I missed that portion of it in my life, and so now I'm content to just be able to play music and to appreciate music on a slightly deeper level than, oh, hey, I like that song, you know, and I can think about it and think, oh, you know, this is probably why the key changes here, and like that kind of thing, and I enjoy that a lot.
That is so cool. My last item that I've kept and brought forward with me is not nearly that neat, but I think it will not shock you. But I will say it in a broad way, but making fun of movies is something that I've brought with me. And it's not just like I sit around and watch things and just make fun of them. I actually don't participate in it. But I love Mystery Science Theater 3000. It's something that we shared. We connected over when we were kids, recording them off of the Comedy Channel and then Comedy Central. And finally Sci-Fi towards the end. I had a massive VHS collection. I got rid of that several years ago, and I think it was disintegrating and possibly a fire hazard. I think many people, as they were able to get them digitally, then they get rid of their VHS collections. But Mystery Science Theater was a show where they'd sit, and for those of you that are less familiar with it, it's the silhouettes at the bottom that would watch bad movies and point at them and make funny jokes, right? I always thought they were hilarious. I was introduced to it at Thanksgiving, what they called their Turkey Day marathons. They would just go and they'd have 24 hours of Mystery Science Theater, where they'd show 12 bad movies and the robots and Joel at the time making fun of them. And the first time I watched it, I was like, I'm hooked. This is hilarious to me and makes sense, right? That this is a perfect canvas. Then these bad cheesy movies are a great, like a great foil for these really funny people. Puppets, and as well as the humans that are operating them. And it's stuck with me. I still love Mystery Science Theater. In the area that we're recording, I've got the autograph of the four major cast members behind me, at least those that would respond to me when I would ask for autographs, or those that I could find to buy. And I still love it to this day. I am a massive fan of the project that was brought up by Mike Nelson, who was the second host of the series. So Joel invented the show, was there for 4.5 seasons, and then left. And then Mike took over as the head writer. And really, he was always my favorite. His sense of humor aligned very much with mine. And he has a new project. He's been doing it for 16 years now. It was his 16th anniversary recently. And it's called Riff Tracks. And I still watch those. Everything new that Mike, Kevin, and Bill, which were the three main guys from Mystery Science Theater days. Kevin and Bill were the voices of Tom Servo and Crow, respectively. Everything that they do, I still buy and I enjoy, and it's shaped why it matters. It shaped my sense of humor. I think that I learned what my idea of funny was, and my standard bearer of funny came from that show, and I compare everything else that I think might be funny against it, and most things don't even come close, but they did. They helped me understand what it meant, what would evoke a real laugh, and what would evoke certainly one from me, and what I thought, how to construct what I thought was a joke, and it comes from their goofiness and the Cowtown Puppet Show, as they would call it, and so making fun of movies has stuck with me, whether it's Mystery Science Theater, and I've tried to watch some of the new stuff that they've done. It does not work for me. I do not like it. I think it's over-scripted and over-produced and too sing-songy. It doesn't feel funny or natural. What I like is watching these things where they make fun of movies, and it's like watching them with your funniest friend. And you're just kind of sort of in awe of the different jokes that they make, and they're pointing out the things maybe that you noticed, maybe that you didn't notice necessarily, but it's really funny. Once you do start to see it, you can't unsee it. That mustache looks fake, those sorts of things. And it stuck with me. It shaped my sense of humor. And I think it's in terms of pop culture, nothing has been even remotely as close to having an impact on me as Mystery Science Theater in the movie making fun of industry. And it is a little cottage industry.
Yeah, that is a great choice, and easily could have been on my list. You introduced me to Mystery Science Theater, and immediately I took to it, and became an instant fan. And the comment that you made that it formed your sense of humor, I absolutely feel that too. Between Mystery Science Theater and Kids in the Hall, that is me. I mean, that's what I grew up on. That is what formed my personality. So I totally hear what you're saying. And man, what a great option. What a great pick. I was a little harder on the show when it transitioned to Sci-Fi Channel. It really hurt to lose some of those cast members. So I didn't watch a lot of those. I just see a couple here and there. And I always just felt like it was missing something. As I've grown older, maybe wiser, maybe just more understanding, I accept all of it now. Yeah. And so even the new seasons with Jonah Ray as the host, I was helped a little bit in that I knew Jonah Ray before he became the Mystery Science Theater host. And I was a fan of his stand-up and some of the other work that he'd done. So when Joel was like, Jonah Ray, somebody else, I was like, oh my gosh, that's great. So I had a little bit of an in with those newer seasons. And I've enjoyed them. It's probably not as high quality as some of the original ones. Maybe a little bit overthought, but I also wonder if it's just references have changed so much, and I'm going to laugh a lot more at, hey, they've arrested Harlan Ellison, good, versus, oh, this is a Britney Spears song. I'm like, oh, it is? I missed that, So I give them a little bit of leeway that way, but yeah, Mystery Science Theater has certainly been a huge influence in both of our lives.
It has, and I think that some of it's the difference between what Joel is doing now with the new Mystery Science Theater, and what Mike has continued to do with Riff Tracks. Some of it's the sensibilities, right? Mike's humor is a little bit more biting, a little bit more cutting. Joel was a little more sleepy and good natured, and I always just gravitated. I just thought Mike was funnier, and I still do. I listen to the podcasts. I listen to his podcast. I recently shipped some books to him to get autographed. I'm hoping that I get them back. Yeah.
Is one of them Death Rat?
I did not ship the novels. I shipped the book of essays.
Books?
Yeah,
okay.
Mind Over Matters and Movie Mega Cheese.
I wish he'd do more novels. I thought Death Rat was
announce? I have not read Death Rat.
Really?
I should, but I think he announced a sequel to Death Rat. I'm not sure it actually happened.
I haven't seen it, but yeah, if you could,
I should read it.
If you can find a copy of it, it is very well done, and it's his humor pouring through it the whole time. But I'd love for him to do more novels if he's listening.
So I have avoided it, and this is something that my personality. I tend to avoid things if I have a very high opinion of someone, and I don't want anything to shake that opinion in any way. So I was like, okay, what if I don't like Death Rat? I should just avoid it. And I need to.
No possibility.
No, I don't even know that it exists. In fact, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. That's an urban legend. He never wrote a novel. No, I need to. I just need to read that. Yeah. So I would be terrified to meet them, to meet him, because I think so much of him. He's a great human being. He's a very strong Christian. He does a podcast with his pastor, and he just seems like a great guy. And I'd be terrified to meet him, because what if he wasn't? What if he was like extremely rude to me, made me cry? Then would I just hate Mystery Science Theater? Probably not. But I think it's like, don't meet your heroes sort of thing.
Sure. I'd be afraid to meet him, because I'd be afraid I'd say something. He'd be like, I wrote that.
Right. You just stole that from me. And he's also really smart. I'd be afraid he'd be like, man, you're really dumb. You're not.
He seems like,
how do you function?
He seems like an okay guy.
I think that he is, right?
Right.
I'm just a little intimidated by.
That's fair.
By that. So, all right. Well, those are my keeps.
Yeah.
All right. Left.
Good things to keep. Things I left behind. My first one is going to sadden you, because it is comic books.
Oh.
And maybe it's, and especially listening to your description, maybe it's not so much I left it behind, but the way I'm looking at this is, I don't buy them anymore. I don't really read them anymore. They were a huge part of growing up. But it got to a point where the publishers had twisted everything I loved so much that it was like I wasn't enjoying it the same way that I was. It became a ridiculously expensive hobby. When we were growing up, 98 cents for an issue, I remember it getting as far as like $1.50 an issue, and
even then it was on really nice paper.
It was, yeah.
You got something for the money.
Exactly, you did. And then when I stopped buying comic books, we're talking like $4.99 an issue for tissue paper.
Yeah,
I mean,
wow.
it really ballooned. And I have a good friend who still actively buys and actively collects, and he's like, yeah, it's no better. It's, if anything, it's worse. You're paying more for less quality. So I mean, that part of that is just kind of heartbreaking. And I used to have several long boxes, like maybe 5 or so long boxes of comic books in my closet of like the stuff from history, like, the things that I loved growing up and that kind of thing. And I passed a bunch of those on, some to my kids, some to just other friends who collected.
Me. There's
some
my
to
long
you.
box
Yeah,
over there.
yeah.
It's a short box up there, but Justice League.
You've got the Keith Giffen Justice League run.
And I pointed to that so our podcast listeners
can see where it is.
Should see, right?
When
It's
they break
obvious.
into this recording studio,
Right.
they'll know where to find it.
They get into the closet.
But I mean, I still appreciate movies. I'm getting a little burned out on the Marvel Extended Universe, but I've enjoyed the run. I've been very frustrated in what they've done with DC because, like you, growing up, DC was my wheelhouse. I mean, I loved Batman, I loved Superman, I loved Green Lantern, all of it. I read all of it for many, many years, but it finally just became something that I'm like, it's becoming a chore to keep up with, and it's not something that I'm enjoying anymore. So I just look back on the past, and I still own a copy of The Dark Knight Returns because you have to.
Yes.
I still own a copy of Arkham Asylum. I still own a copy of Killing Joke. And
Watchmen? Do you have a copy of Watchmen?
I do have. Yes, I do have a copy of Watchmen. That's a good one. That might be it.
Yeah, those are all sort of seminal works in the field from the 80s.
Yeah. And that was our era.
Yep.
That's where we grew up. So in some senses, I've left comic books behind. But man, you want to talk about 80 to 90 DC? I'm your man.
Right, and it's same here. And I definitely have a lot of love for that. I just have carried that forward in a way that is different. I've carried it forward in my heart. But not in my wallet, because the cost. I do think though that opening it up through digital channels does make it, in getting subscriptions and you could read things, does make it more accessible.
True. And if I were going to do it today, certainly that's the way I would go. But I'm a big fan of tangible.
Sure.
I mean, I have a Kindle, but 9 times out of 10, I'm going to reach for the real book. I mean, that's just kind of my personality and the way that I am. But I was collecting up until probably 2001, and I was dating the girl that would become my wife, and we went to our local comic book store, and I picked up my stack because I had the subscriptions, and I paid my horrific amount of money, and we got in the car, and she put them in the back seat, and I was like, what are you doing? She said, well, I put them in the back seat. I'm like, they don't go in the back seat. So I made her carry my comic books on her lap, and she did not break up with me. So we got married.
Yeah, like a pizza that you don't want to slide around too much.
I mean,
it's interesting.
I hadn't bagged and boarded those yet.
Yeah, right. You don't want them to get bent or whatever.
Of course not.
I was so used to buying comics from the dollar box or the quarter box, I guess, to really date myself. The condition never meant much to me. So I never thought about it in those terms, but yeah. Well, all right. One thing I've left, and stick with me here because you're going to be shocked. Maybe,
Right.
I don't know.
Okay.
I left my idea, an idea that I'd carried along with me about church, and I left that. And I had always considered, and picked up something new in its place. Right? I always considered church to be boring, and if you were enjoying yourself, you probably weren't listening to the message, or and if the song wasn't written 200 years ago and slow and tuneless, that you probably are listening to something that the devil himself composed on a fiery guitar. And those were my ideas of church, right? So a believer, someone of faith, but that did not enjoy going to church very much and dreaded it, viewed it as an obligation. And I carried that with me for too long. And that really what that resulted in is us being very inconsistent in our going to church. And then by that token, with a family, we have 4 kids. With the older kids particularly, they just weren't exposed to the good parts of the church experience. And I left that behind, and I found a church. What I did not open myself up to for too many years was that you could find a church experience that is also enjoyable and that fits in with what you need to get out of it. Paul does say in the Bible, I've become all things to all people so that I might win some. He didn't say, I'm sticking with this, and if you don't like these old songs, then get out of here. And, that's not how it was, right? So I'm not intending to make this overtly religious, but the point that I'm making is that I left the old idea about church behind and embraced a new idea, a new concept that church can be enjoyable, that you can get what you need to from God, from Jesus, without having to have this misery, this tied into it. That you're going to stand, you're going to sing old slow songs, and you're going to have a message that probably doesn't really tie into your life in any meaningful way. When we started to open ourselves up to different ideas about the church experience, then we were able to find the church that was right for us, and then the whole family got engaged, and it totally transformed parts of our lives, huge parts of our lives. And so I'm glad that I left that behind, because it did have a very lasting impact to pick up that new thing, pick up something in its place, which is a church that wasn't, that I did look forward to going to, because you're supposed to enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, you're probably not in the right place. I didn't realize that. I always thought everybody enjoys it. Everybody's poor, everybody's miserable and bored, and you try to keep yourself awake. And that's not the way it needs to be at all. So that is something that has been a huge change in our life in the last decade. And I feel like that was truly something that wasn't just something I picked up, it was something I left. I had to cut ties with my old concepts of what it was like to participate in a religious service and pick up new ones that were much healthier and could stick. And that's been a big difference for us, a huge difference maker.
That's interesting. And it calls to mind two things for me. One is a stand-up comedian named Eddie Izzard has this great line where he's like, all of the joyful gospel music comes out of the pain and suffering of slavery in the South, and all of the miserable gospel music comes out of the wealth of Europe.
Yes, that's a very good observation.
Yeah, and
he was cross-dressing at the time, but he did it, but still.
As a matter of fact, he was.
It doesn't change the wisdom of the observation.
Yes, so I thought like that comes to mind, and I always found that amusing. But I understand what you mean. And there is, this traditional versus contemporary, and there's all different levels on that scale. And I had an experience once where we were going through some trials in life, as everybody goes through trials, and I was sitting at the church building, and it wasn't even during a service. I was just sitting in one of the chairs in like the foyer area, that kind of thing. And I recognized that I was feeling peaceful, which at the time, with some of the stuff we were going through at my house, that there was no peace to be found. And I recognized that peace, and I thought, you know what? Right now, certainly, there's nowhere I'd rather be than right here sitting in a church. And it wasn't even during a service or anything. It was just one of those moments. And so I think that there's a lot of personal discovery that comes to play in religion. And I don't know that a lot of religion accounts for that or gives space for that, maybe. But when you can have that personal discovery and you can find that realization, and that oh, hey, it's okay to enjoy this. It's okay to, give up some of the staunchness, perhaps. Yeah. I don't know if that's the right word, but
no, I think that part of the reason why personal discovery is a really interesting way you frame it is not necessarily something that's encouraged in church. Is that it gets awfully close to finding your truth, right? This kind of your truth. When most religious people believe in an objective truth, right? But personal discovery is just finding your own path to that objective truth. Mm-hmm. Right, not like you're fine. Like everyone has their own truth, and I'm just saying that is something that's a popularized phrase right now, but it's something that does kind of fly in the face of much of religion that believes that there is a version of absolute truth that you need to adhere to, and I think that personal discovery is just finding your path to that.
Yeah.
That's great. I feel like you and I both probably went through some similar things trying to get to a place where you enjoyed being at church. Because if you don't enjoy being there, people are going to pick up on that, and they're going to be like, why would I want to follow in Dad's footsteps?
Yeah.
Let's go to church. Yeah, this is not pleasant. and I'll bring candy so I can stay awake, and at least I'll enjoy the candy, right? And it's been a big change in life. Maybe at some point we could talk about the different steps that you go through and the different things transformations that happen. But I do think that's an important thing, something that I left.
Yeah, very good. All right. The next thing that I left, I think will make you laugh, and I think you'll instantly understand, and then I'll give some more explanation. But I've left behind Quentin Tarantino movies.
Ah.
There was a point in my high school life where I was just kind of swept up in Tarantino fever, and Reservoir Dogs had come out, Pulp Fiction had just come out, and it was the cool thing, right? Like everybody was into this movie and this sort of thing. And I very distinctly remember having a thought one time. There's a scene in Pulp Fiction where somebody accidentally gets shot.
Yes.
And it's played off for laughs. I mean, that's the purpose of it in the film. And I distinctly remember at one point watching it, probably my 18th time watching the film or something crazy like that. And I distinctly remember thinking, why am I finding this funny? And it was really like one of those like grow moments where it was like, oh, I don't, and then like everything that up until that point I had thought was clever and humorous and interesting about the movie, like suddenly really started to turn my stomach. And so, I did see, after Pulp Fiction, I saw Jackie Brown, and that was it. I was just done. I haven't seen a Tarantino movie since. I'm sure that he's done some good work. I'm sure that there are millions of Tarantino fans out there that are listening to me right now saying, oh my gosh, you haven't seen Hateful Eight or, whatever. That's just something I left behind. I was just like, nah, not for me.
Totally understand that. And I remember your dad taking us to see Pulp Fiction, and he probably thought the same thing in the moment. Like, what are they finding enjoyable about this horrible movie?
Yeah.
I think he left,
he
right?
Did.
And he probably should have took us with him.
He probably should have, but he was being cool about it. Like, we sat towards the front, he sat towards the back, and about halfway through the movie, he tapped me on my shoulder. He's like, I'm going to be in the car.
Yeah, that's right. I do remember that. I couldn't recall if he left or not, but I was thinking that he probably did. I totally understand that there are things that I've had that sort of growth process with. I will say that Tarantino's best work came later, so you probably missed it. But and I'm not a big Tarantino fan.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that he's done recently, I have definitely not enjoyed. I think that his single best piece of work, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is very different. It's a different take on the Manson family murders and Hollywood at the time of the murders, and it's sort of an Elseworlds alternative history type view. Very good movie.
Yeah.
Great Brad Pitt performance. But I totally understand, right? There isn't anything funny about what went on in Pulp Fiction, and the good guys in that movie, there aren't any, right? I mean, the closest you get is Bruce Willis's character, who's a boxer who's sort of beat down, but for the most part, there's less bad people than some of the others, right? Some are worse, and some are just downright despicable. But yeah, I think that was probably a very healthy thing, and yeah, there's probably some other filmmakers we probably shouldn't have been exposed to at an early age as well.
Oh, no question. But and no hard feelings to any Tarantino fans out there. It just, for me, that was something that I left behind.
Well, I left something that this was a hard one for me, but baseball. And lost interest over time. I loved baseball. I loved watching baseball, playing baseball, collecting the cards. For health reasons, I had to stop playing. But I still, for many years, followed it. But it was a combination of the home run chasing that went on with McGuire and Sosa, and you found out, and then Bonds later. You found out these guys were all, juicing and jacked and not playing by the rules. And then the strikes, or the threat of strikes looming over it. And I just sort of like put that aside. Like, sports has never been a huge thing for me since. I still enjoy baseball if it's on, and still follow it just enough to be conversant, so that there is a sport that I don't look like, it's totally sportsless. To bring him up again, Simpsons comic book guy, who's worst sports fan ever, as he would probably say. But I disconnected from it. I think professional sports in general probably there leaves a lot that most people, if they really inspect it, they'd be like, yeah, these are not people to be looked up to. There's gems in the rough, right? There's really great humans in that, but for the most part, professional sports people get paid massive amounts of money to do this, and that some of them who do it dishonestly with the whole juicing stuff, it left a bad taste in my mouth. And I think that the more amateur college level, or for us, watching our kids play sports at times, that was much more enjoyable than watching, going to a Cardinals game, even going and being there. There's a minor league stadium here in town. I don't mind to go there. The experience of being in the ballpark is still fun. But I think for me, it was, the sport, it's fun if you love it. And I wasn't getting the sense that the players actually loved it. They may have been in love with their own greatness, their own chase for certain, accolades or certain milestones, or the money in the case of the strikes. But when the professionals don't love their sport, how can you expect the fans to? And that was a point where I disconnected. It was sad for me. This is a big part of my earlier life, but
yeah, I've never been a sports guy. I probably am on the Simpsons comic book guy level of. Somebody asked me about the Super Bowl just recently, and I didn't know who had played. I knew the Chiefs had won, but I couldn't tell you who had. They were
another football team. They won against. They were playing another football team, which was much better than playing a girls basketball team.
Right. So that tells you what level I'm on sports. But I enjoyed playing baseball immensely.
Yeah.
When we were kids and we get neighborhood teams together, that was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it. And I tried to parlay that into watching baseball on TV, and I just never could get into it.
It's tough to translate. You got to really be into it because baseball on TV is boring.
Yes. So it was never something I got into. I never got into any sport. I have watched all three of my kids play sports. I'm glad that phase of life is over. But I can understand your points and why you would leave it behind. All right, my last thing that I left behind, this one saddens me. I've left behind action figures. And it legitimately saddens me because if I had unlimited resources, I would have shelves full of action figures because I love them. They were a huge part of my growing up. I had tons and tons of G.I. Joes, tons of Transformers, tons of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. If I had every toy that I had as a child now, I could sell them and put all three of my kids through college.
Yes.
I had everything that you can imagine. And some of my fondest memories is being 8, 9 years old and just the G.I. Joe wars that would occur on my bedroom floor that would go on for weeks. And it was epic and it was fantastic. And I carried it into adulthood a little bit in the fact that I would buy some Star Wars figures during the big Episode 1 frenzy. I collected up through then, but then it was shortly after that I was like, I can't keep pace with this. They made too many of them. They raised the price of too many of them, and and they've kind of become showpieces and statues now. Where,
right, they're not toys.
Right, exactly. And again, if my resources were limited, I'd have the Todd McFarlane sculpted Voltron on my shelf right now. But I'm not going to pay that much for an action figure, so that was just something I consciously was like, I'll just keep the memories and I'll leave the toys behind.
Oh yeah, well I went through that. I think so many of us have, and you could not afford. That's a hobby now that you couldn't afford. You're right, they're not toys. Nobody plays with them. They buy them, and if you try to participate in that, going to Walmart and trying to dig through and find the right figure, it's become, as an adult who bought toys for my son. And he was buying them to play with them, but you couldn't find them because some adult had already picked through them. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
Yep.
And so no, I did the same as you and left those behind. I did my last big action figure thing I got rid of, and it made several deals resulting in us getting our first real washer and dryer. This was 23 years ago, 24 years ago. So at least I got something useful out of it at the end of the day.
Yeah, that sounds like a great trade.
I traded that for the lightsaber from the lightsaber guy that we knew back in the day. And then I used that and I traded that. I sold that and then funded the purchase of a washer and dryer. But yeah, fun, but it's sort of like hobby or whatever you want to call it, where the people participating in the hobby ruined it for everyone else, including for the little kids who actually would want it. Those are my best memories of not collecting them or admiring them, but playing with them. And, our kids getting to do that now. And, my son's way too big for that. He's 18, so he doesn't do action figures anymore. But even 10 years ago, it was hard. We were buying them used. My little daughter still has, my 5-year-old has lots of Paw Patrol toys.
Yeah.
And so that isn't hasn't been affected by this, but any comic book related thing, Star Wars related thing, all that stuff. It's just a bunch of adults buying them, keeping them in, perfectly sealed in packages and, admiring them, I guess.
And Toy Story 2 taught us what kind of psychological damage that can cause.
It does. It makes you a villain. It makes you an evil villain. But then your toys will get out of the packages at night and roam around.
Yeah, and probably murder you. They just didn't show that in the Toy Story
Stinky movie. Pete was the one I think he was getting out of his package, right? Yes,
and he was the villain because he was bitter that he'd been in his package all these years. Yeah,
I think, was Kelsey Grammer the voice?
He was.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Boy, I haven't watched that movie in years, but it's all coming back to me. Wayne Knight was the owner of the toy store, right? Was it Wayne Knight?
That sounds correct.
The Seinfeld, Newman, and the bad guy from Jurassic Park.
That sounds correct.
I was thinking, certainly the animated guy looked like Wayne Knight. If the voice wasn't him, they modeled the animated character off of him. Well, my last thing, and this is a kind of a jokey throwaway one. So many of these we've expressed a little bit of regret about things we left behind. This one I'm extremely happy that I left behind. Not a serious one at all. Thank goodness. I would not be married if I hadn't left this one behind. That was wrestling. I'm so glad I left that. It has no place in my life. And if you're a listener and you like wrestling, then I'm very happy for you. But I don't. And I remember in the 80s, the late 80s, really thinking, enjoying watching, Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan and these sort of harmless guys. Even the bad guys were harmless back then. They were good. And now I think even the good guys, they all got an edge to them. And I don't know. I like flip the channels. I'll see, the wrestling on. And I'm like, I was going to go through this. I am so glad that I left that behind. It left me, I think, because I wanted this sort of, innocent, fun acrobatics. And then it started to get really, in the 90s, it started to get all edgy. And then I was like, okay, I'll go do something else. That is not one that it would not have benefited me in any way as an adult. Most of these things that we left, you probably could have functioned. I don't know if I could have functioned if I was walking around with the Hulk Hogan t-shirt on. I'm pretty sure I would never have gotten married or had kids or any of that stuff that is really important to me as an adult right now. So that is one that I left, and it can stay gone.
I think that's fair. You bring up an interesting point in how much it changed and how it really did start off as kind of goofy fun. And then suddenly, we were supposed to take this seriously. And, and even though everybody knows it's scripted and everything, like I'm supposed to be emotionally involved with these individuals and I'm rooting for them. And I lost it. I remember enjoying some of the wrestling video games quite a lot, but even then I was like, I don't know who I'm picking. This guy works for me.
Picking the blondest guy with the Hulk Hogan, silken, weird white hair and skin of a hot dog. A very strange looking guy. But I'm glad I left that behind. And the wrestling video games were pretty fun. I haven't played one in a long time. I think I may have one. I think I do have one on my Switch. I just need to fire it up and try it out.
Absolutely. Well, that's an episode right there.
Yeah, and I hope you guys, anyone listening to this, why did I listen to this? Well, think about the stuff that you kept. Why did you keep it? And how has it been important to you? And the stuff that you ejected from your life. And, do you miss it at all? I mean, and it's okay. I think that I actually had a bonus item. Something that's come in and out of my life are martial arts movies. And totally harmless if they had stayed. It's also harmless if it goes, right? It didn't negatively affect me, but I get in moods where I want to watch Jet Li beat up nondescript bad guy number 2, and at times then I'm totally disinterested in that. So some of those things, think about it, right? Was it a good thing that you left it? Do you miss it? You could bring it back. Absolutely. Unless it's wrestling. Do not bring wrestling back.
Anything else is fair game.
Yeah.
But we do as a society kind of put these ideas on ourselves that that, you know, oh, I've let that go. There's no redemption, or there's no second chance, or something like that. And I just think that that's limiting ourselves. You know,
It is.
there's been plenty of things that I've gone back to that I enjoyed as a child, and I'd go back to them, and maybe I'd only go back for 10 minutes.
Right.
But for that 10 minutes, I was 12 years old again, and it was an absolute blast. And then there are things that other people may look at and say, well, that's a little childish, but it's so near and dear to my heart that it's just part of who I am, and I'm okay with that. And if somebody thinks it's childish, that's their opinion, and I have mine.
Well said. Well said. All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for today.
That wraps us up for today. We've got a lot of things to figure out. We've got a huge list of topics that we want to talk about, all kind of with this theme of nostalgia, looking back, you know, two middle-aged guys trying to work it all out. Because one thing that we will say is we do not have all the answers. But by sitting here with microphones, we can probably figure out all the answers.
We can pretend to.
Yeah, I think so. And nobody can tell us no, because we haven't figured out how to get people to call in yet.
That's right.
So we're going to continue to evolve this and kind of figure out our place in the universe and figure it all out.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, folks.